Punch-Out! Nintendo's attempt to cash in on the 80s popularity rush to boxing, ranging all the way up from the arcade machines all the way up to the Wii, and while most people today think of Little Mac as just a consistently terrible Smash character, his games themselves hold up pretty damn well today. Punch-Out's just one of those series that when you bring them up, people really only talk about one or two of the games and may not even know the other ones exist, but believe me they do, and they range from really good to really shit, and that's something I want to bring up today. We're going to go through every single Punch-Out game, at least every single one that I could find. All of this is based off the wiki pages, so if you found a Punch-Out game that's on like your grandma's Nokia or something, I'm sorry, I couldn't really find that. I wouldn't even know where to start on finding that. But with that out of the way, let's get into what everybody cares about. Punch-Out started all the way in arcades in 1984 with the original title, and goddamn does this game feel outdated as all hell, but let's start with the good. The game already brings out some of the most classic characters featured for decades to come, even maintaining some of the exact same mechanics throughout it all. But I'm sure this is excruciating for you to watch just because this looks like actual fucking dog shit. Who in the hell thought making your character a green see-through mesh was a decent idea? I can't even see half of what the hell my opponent's trying to do right now. And even this makes some of the earlier bosses fucking annoying. So it turns out that these games suck absolute dick and balls to emulate, so unfortunately I will have to be brief over these arcade titles. So unfortunately I could not finish these, but don't worry, I cleared through every other game. Punch-Out and its successor, Super Punch-Out for the arcade, are a great launchpad for the series to follow up on, but they don't hold up quite as well as I had hoped. The controls feel so stiff, and compared to later home releases, they just don't have the same fast-paced gameplay, making them an odd point in the game's history. Oh, wait, look everyone, it's Soda Pop.
Vodka Drunken.
That's fucking amazing. The fact that Nintendo switched Vodka Drunkinski to Soda Popinski makes me so unbelievably fucking sad. That's a banger name. I might name my firstborn son that, what the fuck? This is the first of a couple games that aren't branded as Punch-Out games, but officially are. Okay, so let's get into this. We arm wrestle the opponent by mashing left, and then dealing with your opponent's attacks by mashing A or something. The only real connection between this and Punch-Out is Little Mac and Bald Bull, so fuck this game, we're moving on. Okay, here's that other fakey fake bullshit Punch-Out game. This one being for the Game & Watch though. And this is total dog shit. There are actually only 3 controls in this game, no story, no career mode, meaning that once you've played this game and you've used 3 different moves, you've essentially seen it all. There's a dodge that avoids any type of punch, a high punch, and a low punch, and of course we can adjust our guard to block for each. Now I'd be doing this game a disservice by not mentioning the fact that this game is obviously meant for multiplayer, and goofing around with it is a pretty damn good time actually. So if you have a safe, legal means to emulate it, go right on ahead. This is a lot of fun, but it's time we move on to the good stuff. We finally get to talk about the shit you all definitely came here for. Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, featuring Mike Tyson as an actual boss. It's actually pretty fucking insane to think about, all things considered, especially thinking about how much of a celebrity he was at the time. Nintendo actually fleeced Mike here, only paying him $50,000 for his likeness in the game. This was right before he won his first heavyweight championship match, and the game's popularity exploded when he did so, netting Nintendo $1.7 billion. That is 0.0003% of the profits that Mike Tyson received from the game. This game fixed every single problem that the originals had with style. The camera angle is so much better than the arcade versions, and they even spice up the gameplay to boot. You can now acquire star points through well-timed punches unique to every fight in the game, allowing for a substantially more powerful punch that can even one-shot certain bosses if used at the right time. The old school dodge and counter system is here, but with even more emphasis on learning the boss's attack patterns, dodging, and getting a full damage punish, but also more importantly learning specific interrupts to earn star points. The classic Punch-Out OST is still here, but a bit more refined and better than it's ever been, and this could just be the nostalgia talking, but this shit low-key slaps. We get to see Little Mac fully for the first time here, and the game actually tries to give him some character, and the feeling of seeing how small Mac is compared to the bigger bosses really gives a feeling of intimidation that they need. One thing that the game doesn't get nearly enough credit for is how well it teaches you to play the game with these invisible tutorials. The game opener, Glass Joe, will block mid or high, teaching you that your aim matters in this game. Von Kaiser is going to teach you the power of star punches and how they can make this boss a piece of cake, and Piston Honda teaches you about blocking, timing, and counter punching. Overall, the Minor Cup is just kind of a big glorified tutorial. This is also the first instance of major character changes in many of the fighters. Most notably, Piston Hurricane got rebranded as Piston Honda, retaining mostly the same moves. Great Tiger made a comeback, but more so focuses on magic and tricky attacks like the Tiger Punch that needs to be defended, and that's a free knockdown. Something that this game nails more than any other game before it is the sense of personality that the game builds. Characters like Sandman are extremely respectable clean boxers only using their raw talents instead of a boxer with high amounts of infractions like Macho Man for example. Overall, the changed camera angle makes countering moves like the piston rush substantially easier to deal with, but don't get it twisted. This is no easy game. I would say it's moderately easier than some of the earlier entries, except for Tyson, that is. We'll get to him later. Being the first ever home release in the series, they decided to add a form of checkpoints after each and every circuit. While archaic today, the passcode system was somewhat serviceable at the time, and finding an old piece of paper with all the codes on it brought back a shit ton of memories. I think in terms of overall design though, this game certainly has its flaws. Nearly all of the game's bosses have one unique gimmick that can turn a tough fight into a 30-second fight with no challenge involved whatsoever. And while an initial playthrough might be absolutely brutal, the second one will make you question why any of it ever seemed tough in the first place. To sort of prove this point, I got a good friend of mine who's never played through this game at all to race against me to see exactly how long it would take him to beat the game if he did so at all. But what I didn't tell him is that I swapped out his ROM file for a hacked version I accidentally downloaded that swaps all the in-game sprites for nude ones, so enjoy his reaction.
Why is he naked? What the fuck?
This test went about exactly as I expected. I mean, after a loss to Tyson, I lapped him and ran it all the way back, so very clearly this game is ridiculously easy once you understand the boss's tricks. Which, to be fair, is something you could say about every game ever, but even my friend here struggled with Glass Joe at the start, and within an hour of tough restarts, he made his way all the way to Bald Bull, which was pretty damn impressive. I would say the epitome of this game's identity is not Bald Bull like I'd imagine you'd expect me to say, but actually Soda Popinski. And yes, this is unfortunately the game where Soda got renamed from Vodka Drunkinski. Yes, I know. But this is by far my favorite iteration of him. His standard boxing prowess is absolutely insane, and fighting him for the first time was brutal. Because it's not like this is impossible without a trick, but it's insanely challenging whittling down his health and dealing with those brutal uppercuts. But one single trick makes this go from a stupid challenge to easily one of the easiest in the game. The trick I'm referring to is blocking in the face of his uppercut and getting a star point and then landing it, which insta-downs no matter what. The reason I'd say this is more so the definition of the game's identity is because I have no idea how the fuck anyone discovered this, because the game teaches you very early on that uppercuts are unblockable, so why would anyone try this against Popinski? It's a random gimmick that few people would ever discover, but it alone makes this boss go from a difficult, tough fight to a really easy, fun fight that I always look forward to. And honestly, there are still characters that I don't know the gimmick to, like Don Flamengo Rematch, which I just straight up enjoy as a clean boxing match. Another thing this game does perfectly is tension. With bosses like Sandman and Macho Man, they have these moves that you can't interrupt and you have to dodge, and they'll usually flash right before it pops, and waiting for that little flicker is nerve-wracking and easily one of the best aspects of the game, no contest. But before we wrap this game up, we have to talk about the game's final bosses. The license to Tyson's likeness was only a limited time deal, and when that deal let up, they released the game as just Punch-Out!, where the dream fight at the end was replaced with a new clone of Mike Tyson called Mr. Dream, who's essentially the identical same thing. But a lot of people don't realize that there's actually a third release of this game that was released before Mike Tyson's version, commonly referred to as the Gold Label Punch-Out! Game. It's largely the same as the Mike Tyson version, but instead this time the final boss is the Macho Man, just like one of the arcade games. But goddamn dude, if you play the Tyson version of this game, this is like a borderline traumatic challenge. It took me 20 minutes just to get past the first phase of this fight, and you need to play perfectly through the first minute and a half because one of these uppercuts will take you down in one punch. And it's not like Macho Man where these insta-kill tactics are used sparingly, he throws out these bitches constantly. Overall, I would say Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! Probably has the most legacy out of any game in the series, being held as one of the greatest of all time. Now, there's actually a fan project of this game called the Punch-Out! Definitive Project, which takes bosses from other games in the series and puts them in the Punch-Out! Style with different sprites and all kinds of stuff. It's really interesting, go check it out. But unfortunately, it's time for us to move on to the sequel, Super Punch-Out! For the SNES. So you know how the real only successful game in the series had that big camera change to avoid that horrible see-through element? Well, the sequel decided to just say fuck that and goes right back to it, albeit in a far more tasteful way. The now blonde Little Mac being at low opacity allows for a somewhat see-through aspect, meaning that you can see like 90% of the boss. While specifically on the topic of visuals, I must say that the general aesthetic of this game is far and above the one on the NES, and our favorite characters are looking better than ever. Piston Honda got replaced by Piston Hurricane once again, and there are just a few odd missions in the character list, like Great Tiger, who I thought was one of the most memorable fights in the series. Getting rid of Von Kaiser and Don Flamenco was somewhat understandable, but I cannot forgive them for getting rid of King Hippo. However, some of the new challenges I find to be really well made. For starters, I really like Mass Muscle for his obvious cheating but generally risky playstyle, making for a very high risk, high reward match. And Aaron Ryan is also a super well done character, having a very difficult to read Piston Rush style move, and anytime you connect a KO punch, he'll attempt to grab, and I'm pretty sure you can loop him with this. And yes, now there are KO punches instead of star punches, which completely change the way you approach the game. Essentially, for every punch you land on your your opponent, you build up momentum up to an S, which is presumably super, but I'm calling this Dicko mode. While in Dicko mode, you get an empowered KO punch, which allows you to delete the hell out of bosses, and as long as you don't take any hits, the bar will just stay there rewarding patient defensive players. Overall, I think I like this just as much as I do the star punch system. The game also reintroduces the duck mechanic from the arcade machines, allowing for there to be another dimension to avoid attacks, meaning that there are now also a few unavoidable attacks unless you duck, something that the game teaches you very early on with Bear Hugger. The game also puts a hell of a lot of emphasis on blocking and counterattacking, if only because the hearts that indicated your stamina in the NES game have been completely removed now, allowing for blocking to be a very safe-ish option outside of the many unblockables in the game. The big bosses for this game have once again been changed out, and we get a few new original characters in the Bruiser brothers, who are both notorious cheaters. And on the topic of cheating, I think this is the title where the series goes from cheating that's just small infractions to literally like breaking your arm mid-fight. Overall, this game is very solid, but doesn't really do anything too special. It's just a very generic punch-out game that doesn't innovate too much and tries to bring some of the older mechanics into the new formula. It works fine enough, but it's not anything to really write home about. There's just so many things that just sort of put me off from this game in a way. For starters, there's no longer multiple rounds, and if you don't get a TKO in less than 3 minutes, you automatically lose the fight. I don't know why this is in the game, especially since the NES game already fixed the issue, giving you some breathing room and advice on the current boss, but whatever. And on top of this, the opponent's coach will shout tips at them, meaning you need to stop looking at the opponent and read their message to figure out what the hell's going on. When you're going up against opponents like Macho Man, this is essential, and looking away from your opponent is just such an unbelievably unnatural thing to do. While I don't have any numbers on me, I have to imagine this didn't even come close to the sales of Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, and it's no wonder why this game started the longest gap in the series, with it taking 15 years before we got the Wii version of Punch-Out. And before I talk about how much I like this game, I have to say that this series is fucking shit when it comes to naming things. The first game in the series, Punch-Out. The second game, Super Punch-Out. The third game, Punch-Out. The fourth game, Super Punch-Out. And just when you think they'd get their shit together, they make a third game called Punch-Out. What the actual fuck? But with that out of the way, this is goddamn eye candy. All of our classic characters have been faithfully brought up to modern graphics, and goddamn do they look wonderful. Some changes have been made, but we'll go through those in a minute. This is a perfect way to bring the old game to life and takes inspiration not only from Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, but also from Super Punch-Out, mainly with the camera angle, and I don't really mind it that much. I can't really put my finger on it, but this is substantially more manageable, and it never really gets in your way. This is also the first Punch-Out without the classic digital talking sounds that all the games had prior to it. And while I do miss it, hearing the characters speak in their native languages and having much more pronounced personalities is fantastic. Just like Super Punch-Out, we have a career mode with save files, and the game decides to modernize a bit and removes the element of making you work your way up through the ranks every single time you get a game over, and now you just get to rematch the bosses whenever you want. Before we go through the career mode itself, let's talk about some gameplay changes. Star punches have been reworked and are no longer used individually, and now you always get one big punch that gets progressively stronger depending on how many stars you have. Ducking is also still here, and we see the return of some duck-only attacks on some classic characters. But enough of that, let's talk the career mode. Little Mac and Doc are aspiring to win the world circuit, and we have to work our way up the chain, starting with the minor circuit composed of Glass Joe, Von Kaiser, our brand new boxer Disco Kid, and King Hippo. Glass Joe remains completely intact thankfully and remains the punching bag of the entire series, but Von Kaiser on the other hand has actually changed a little bit and is no longer the piss easy fight he used to be and now has some pretty cool animations too. Disco Kid's an alright enough fight, being the only new boxer in the game, and really whipped my ass until I figured out that the direction you dodge in this game is actually super important. Overall, if you're a returning player, you might actually struggle more with this game than a new player just because you're expecting a certain attack pattern, and do not get it twisted, this is not a remaster of the original Punch-Out game, and certain loops or strategies just don't work. And while I do miss certain bosses like Flamenco having their classic loops, I can appreciate the better game design overall. Tiger also returns, but in admittedly inferior fashion in my eyes, and no longer has the iconic Tiger Punch, and now has a much less interesting but still somewhat intimidating magic attack where you need to read if he's the clone or the real Tiger that's attacking you. And no matter what, if you guess wrong, you're gonna take a hit. I'm also gonna take a minute to talk about the promotional stuff for this game because I find it to be absolutely fantastic. There were 3 promotional ads featuring some of the boxers, mainly being King Hippo, Piston Honda, and Great Tiger, and they are absolutely fantastic. Here, just have a watch.
I've been really into my magic for the last few years. And also my music.
Cause I'm the magic man, the great GT. I've got more bling on my head than King Louis.
The new record drops in July.
There's a hippo shake without a little bit of meat. I moved here back in 94, after I retired. It's really like a community,
Believe it or not, he's a soft-spoken person, but that rage is still there.
I'll be honest with you. I have made a lot of money as a boxer. And I put every penny of it, every last penny of it, into that blender. And just letting it ride, You are going to turn it on. Carl, I need this. King is back. Long live the king.
I really wish more games would go through the promotional style of having real-life actors portray the characters in more of a silly and goofy way. I think it's super entertaining, and I'm sure it did wonders for the game's sales. And also, to my surprise, Bear Hugger made it back with an excellent comeback, with this being his best appearance yet. And out of all of the bosses who weren't in the NES game, I'd have to say Bear Hugger is probably my favorite. The main chunk of the game is the world circuit though, and thankfully they decided to bring back Aaron Ryan, but he's changed from a normal-ish dude to like a rabid dog who cheats more than anyone else by a landslide. Bald Bull is also back, but just isn't quite as intimidating or fun as the old school version overall. And honestly, the first half of this game is just okay, finishing with Sandman as the champ this time around, and while looking tough and better than ever, he just isn't that interesting. But everything changed for me with the title defense half of the game. These are fucking brutal at times, and I'm ashamed to say that after underestimating Joe, he did manage to beat me one time. Yeah, I'm not too proud of that one. These are easily the best part of the game, with such obvious cheating that it's sort of funny at certain points. But a large portion of the boxers just train a lot harder, and they become really fun and tough fights. And many of my least favorite fights in the game, like Piston Honda, flip to one of my absolute favorites. And some of the bosses even bring back some of their old gimmicks, like Bald Bull needing to be KO'd with a star punch, just like his original second fight. I mean, this is fantastic. I was originally going to be a little bit harsh with the Wii title, but after finishing the title defense, dude, god damn it, I can't dislike this game even in the slightest. This is objectively probably the best Punch-Out game. Not by much, I would say the NES game is neck and neck with this, but I think when I'm coming back to this series, this is probably the game I'll play, if only because DK makes a cameo. Before I wrap this video up though, I want to talk about the speedrunning community for these games because they are something else. While the original two arcade games don't have a whole lot to speak of in terms of speedrunning, the NES game is absolutely apeshit in terms of speedruns. The world record today sits at sub 15 minutes for the single segment category, which is absolutely insane. And some people who either hate themselves or have way too much time on their hands run this game blindfolded. And there's deadass a category called the Tyson Challenge, where you need to beat 14 consecutive Tyson fights without losing once. Who's coming up with these? And of all of the people who speedrun these games, guess who holds almost every single world record? Mr. Summoning Salt himself. If you're even slightly into speedrunning, you should know who this dude is. He's the dude who does like 90% of the speedrunning history videos, so go check him out. God knows he deserves a sub more than I do. The SNES game has a somewhat active community, but it's nothing really to speak of, and the Wii game is also pretty damn impressive. Well, that about rounds off the series, and as of today, we're approaching the 15-year mark since we've gotten a new game, and despite the great sales the Wii game has gotten, we have gotten no indication of a new title, but there's still hope. Overall, to grade the entire series, I'd give the original Punch-Out for arcade a 65%. I'd give Super Punch-Out for the arcade a 70%. I'd give the Mike Tyson's Punch-Out a fat 89%. The SNES game will give a solid 80%, and finally the Wii version earns a 90%. So overall, the Punch-Out series earns an average of a 78.8 C+. But to be honest, the real grade excluding the arcade games is about an 86.7 B+. Alright everyone, I'm done talking. If you like the content and you want to see something similar in the future, do let me know with a like and a sub, and if you have any game suggestions, just let me know in the comments below. And with that, I'll see you on the next one.